Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of the Future of Work show. Today, we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, and particularly what it means in India. As you'll see through the course of our conversation, I have with me someone who is really well placed to answer some of the questions which perhaps are top of my mind, and which perhaps very few discussions and conferences ever really get to the heart of. So let me bring on my special guest. Hi, Anu.
Hi, Shani. Lovely to be here.
Oh, thank you. So, for everyone who doesn't know Anuranjita, now Anuranjita is someone who has had what I would call a somewhat of a dream career. She was the CHRO of Citibank in India. She's had a very long run with Citibank, I think 22-ish years.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
long time. People, I almost thought I would get retired from there. So, well, not.
And then she was the managing director at RBS, but that's not all. She's an author. She's the author of two books, which are very relevant to our discussion here. Can You Have It All and Color Matters. And now she's an entrepreneur. And in true Anuranjita style, she doesn't have one organization, she's got two organizations. So, Women in Technology, as well as in the SCAP Ventures. Anu, I'm so happy to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Shalini. It's always a pleasure to be with you, whether on the show or off the show. And I'm so looking forward to the session because I'm hoping to actually take some learnings for myself as I talk to you and hopefully people who would be listening to us.
Oh, no, thank you so much. See, I'll tell you why I really wanted you on the show. There's been so much conversation on DNI over the last many, many years. And you've had a very long career. I think we're more or less contemporaries in terms of
Yeah.
when we started out and how our careers moved. And of course, you would have seen, I've seen things have changed in many very significant ways over the last 25, 27 years. I remember when I was graduating from IM, there were many roles, particularly sales roles, which were non
Mhm.
urban or non
Yeah.
metro, or even factory HR roles, where whether stated or unstated, there was a very, very strong preference for men. And in some cases, actually, it was just stated that we don't hire women for these
Yeah.
roles.
Yeah.
When I had, my two kids, and I remember when I came back to work with an employer, uh, I'd been, I'd taken a break for about 18 months. And actually, in those 18 months, I was working, but I was working part time or as a freelancer. And when I came back in the day now it sounds, my employer offered me half because, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And his observation was, if you take time off or away to raise a family, it suggests you're not particularly serious about your career. So in that sense, things and conversations have moved very, very far, and that kind of conversation would never happen in a good, one of the blue chip A grade companies today. Which was the kind of conversations which I'm sure you faced, I faced, and many women starting out when we did faced. So that's one part of the story, of course. But then there is the other part of the story, which is, to my mind, almost shocking. So if we look at women's labor force participation rates, ILO's ranking of 180 countries, we are at 171,
Yeah.
and we're just behind Saudi Arabia and just ahead of Egypt. And if we look at all our neighbors, Nepal is at 80%, Bangladesh is at 36%, Pakistan's higher than us. So something isn't quite working. The labor force participation of women in the last 15 years has dropped by almost a third. And we're one of the very few countries to see this kind of a consistent reverse trend where, the labor force participation is dropping. So I wanted to ask you, what is your sense of what's really, really happening, and how are we so different from any country in the world, and even our neighbors, in that we have consistently dropping women's labor force participation? Long question, sorry.
No, 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 no. I think you brought up some very relevant points and relevant data. And just to add to it, there was an article in Mint just about a few days back, which stated that amongst the BRIC countries, India is the lowest at 27% gender workforce participation, and China is 60%. So we are the lowest amongst the developing countries, so to say. And also, I think not that the numbers were great to start with, but during COVID, they are in a free fall.
Yeah.
And what we are seeing in the market, whether as a part of WIT or otherwise, is that either women are stepping off voluntarily, or they fall into the redundancy or restructuring criteria. And Shalini, you and I have been on the other side, where we know when cost cuttings happen, which are happening during COVID. We look at roles which are non-client facing, non-revenue generating, people who have less tenures. Now, by default, most women fall into that criteria. So we're seeing a bit of free fall, where about 39% of the women workforce has lost their jobs during COVID, vis-a-vis 20% men. So just giving you some sense of where we are, 4 out of 10 women have lost their job during COVID next in India, right? And
Wow.
of course, this is for my WIT community, where I was looking at a list of Forbes, which has been recently published just last month, which shows top 20 companies which are rated highly for working women. None of the tech companies figure there, and there's a strange opposite correlation. It's the valuation of tech companies, which is going into trillions, right? But the diversity is missing. And so my point is not that there is a correlation actually, but my point is, what can we do more of if we had diversity? What are the missed opportunities, and what is the innovation? So I think I completely agree with you. And we've been doing actually some research on this, and we've done about, I would say, over the last few months, there have been 20 focus groups which have been held, thanks to the board taking a very strong view. And what we're discovering are twofold. So one is, of course, there is organization and how gender is looked at in the context of what we do back at work by men and the larger workforce, which also includes women. And the second bit is the women themselves. So there is continuous aspiration gap, which yet continues to persist. And and when I talk to a lot of women who've taken off work, and unlike you, who've had the hunger and the aspiration to come back, I would categorize them in 3 buckets. Women who want to work because they want to supplement family income, period. That's the only aspiration I have. So my husband is the bread earner, and I just want to kind of put some butter on the bread that he brings. And that's a very good reason to work, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I'm not being judgmental. But then you're looking for a job, not a career. And there's a difference between the two. Then there are women who are simply bored. Okay, they are affluent, and as Economist in 2018 showed us that in India, affluence has a reverse correlation with women employment. So the more affluent the family gets, how much ever educated or talented she might be, she just drops off because she says, family says there's enough. She also thinks there's enough. So let me say that it's not somebody's coercing her. There may be families or there may be social issues where she's being told, it's okay for you not to work and you should be at home. But there are also women, and I can tell you women in my circle, who voluntarily choose not to work because they don't have to. But she'll come back and saying, look, I want to keep busy. So very often they would come back and think, let me do something. Kuch to kar sakte hain, to run away from boredom. Those are most unsustainable. I'm talking about women, by the way, from management institutes like IIMs. I'm talking about engineers from top tier engineering colleges. These are educated women who have a thought process of their own. But they also some of them fall into this category. And of course, there's a third one who really wants to make the impact, who wants to seriously persist. And what we find is the first category and the third category is more sticky because they have a reason. One needs the money and one needs purpose and value. Is the second middle category, which is the most non-sticky, I would say, because they have it. And so they don't feel the need to push along. So I think there is a, there is this whole aspiration which women need to aspire. And then there is this whole thing at home about who is influencing her decision. And usually, I think from the time you and I came in the workforce, this debate has continued, but the needle has not really moved. So if you talk to any organization, they'll tell you, oh, I know we have 30-35% workforce. The moment I start unpeeling the onion, they are not sitting in decision making roles by choice or sometimes not by choice. So the needle's not going to move. You have best of programs, you have best of discussions happening, but yet it's not moving the needle. So we got to pause and think, what are we not getting right? And and what is the engagement with the influencing spouses and the mothers and the mother-in-laws who are influencing these decisions? And I don't want to put the women as if they are easily gullible and persuaded because of social pressures. I don't believe that. I'm talking about educated women. I think they have a mind of their own and they believe that it's okay sometimes to take it easy. So I'm a little provocative on that one, because even if educated women, professional women, maybe 1 or 2%, but in India, we're talking in millions, and they can really move the needle if they wish to. And then the second aspect is the whole unconscious bias and how the organizations look at them, and what can we do to make it better. And I think on that one, there's been active engagement, active discussion, and the needle has yet to move. I'm not saying all organizations in the same evolution in their journey. We are working currently with organizations who have 15%, none at leadership level. And sometimes it's because men at top are very nervous about having a woman in significant roles. And it's not lost. And maybe I'm kind of reaching a line, but things like Posh Act and maternity extensions, all of those things have taken a toll on the industry about why more women are not being inducted. So I'm a great believer of saying the more she stays away, the difficult it is to integrate. But at the same time, organizations don't need to be scared of these policy changes. They have to embrace it. But unfortunately, that's had an impact. So I think those two factors, coupled with the fact that we are trying to make an attempt, have kept us going. If the organization hadn't taken the right steps, we probably would have seen a far bigger free fall, as we're seeing during COVID. So I'm going to pause here, and Shalini, and give the baton back to you.
Yeah. So I want to ask you if you think there's any reason why, because in your three categories, is there any reason why these play out differently in India versus other countries? You've lived and worked in other places of the world. What do you think is particular about India that we have? We're 171 out of 180 countries, so that's really a cause of concern. There's obviously something which is very different from the median. The median is actually 48 point some percent, so it's double of our workforce participation. So what do you think it is about India? Because wouldn't some of these factors be true anywhere in the world?
You're absolutely right. And I'll tell you that even that 171 is coming because of unskilled labor. Because if you're poor, the lady of the house is going out to do unskilled work, whether it's cooking, cleaning,
agriculture.
Yeah. So women at that level are keeping us afloat. It isn't women necessarily in the sectors where you and I have worked, Shalini. It's a minuscule of those women. So I think the question will be for a lot of women who are listening to this is what's keeping you back? And as I said, one of the biggest one is the more affluent you get, the more you feel almost that there is a social permission to step back, and the whole environment doesn't really push you hard enough. You haven't experienced being a bread earner in a family, so it's okay. So you give yourself the permission to step back a bit. So I think it's about building that aspiration very early. Maybe I had a working mother who's a doctor, and so I saw it. And I think for me, as I grew up, there wasn't an option but to be on your own. In my life, the motto, since my husband's not around, is his money is my money and my money is my money. Being financially secure for myself is extremely important. And it's difficult for me to have somebody else pay my bills. And that's how I kind of grew up. So, not being able to create value and being myself and keeping myself secure has never occurred to me. So, it takes two to tango in a relationship or in a marriage. But I see the gap is more at professional levels. And the only reason, I mean, people talk about the three M's or four M's, which I've spoken about, and can I have it all, whether it's your marriage or, maternity or mobility. And I put a fourth M to it, which is motivation. Right? So I think, yes, there are life stages of a woman. And yes, she needs to be more flexible, like we've all been at some point of time in our life. But at the same time, do you really let the motivation slip away? You and I both have kids, and by God's grace, they've grown up fine, and we both work. So, every time there's a first time mother, and especially in India, there are more conversations about, like, I want to win the best mother, award for some reason. And it's just the way you're brought up is like uh, your soul status is to be a mother and the best mother. So if the kid is unwell, you just can't go to office, and she puts herself under immense moral pressure. So family comes first. But why shouldn't that logic also apply to the man? Why should a man feel that the family doesn't come first? I don't think, our husbands feel that. It's just that they manage it in a very different way. So I think asking for that, balancing it out within your immediate family, especially when there are professionals, is not happening enough. Today, I think the laws have changed in at least, accommodating some of these, I would say, life stages of women. So, at our time, maternity leave was 3 months. Now it's 6 months. Look, I don't know if that's really changed the numbers. Okay. I think, on the contrary, what's happening is, when I talk to SME, MME, and for the sake of not being politically incorrect, nobody talks about the issues that they cannot afford 6 months maternity leave. Okay. So what happens is, it's a law. It's a law, and if you don't abide by it, there are implications. So guess what a small company is going to do? Just not hire them, because they cannot afford it. If they have 50% women in workforce, and let's say 20% of them are on mat leave, it's not affordable. So I think some of the policy changes, as much as I agree, are progressive, but are sometimes not applicable to each strata of company. Big companies can afford it. If you look at US, the leave is 4 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And US women do not have great support systems like we have. If you look at Europe, the reason they have extended maternity leave is because they have a negative growth of population. And so the European countries encourage women to have more babies. And so they give long paternity and maternity leave. India certainly has no such problems. So, and also in Europe, a lot of that cost is subsidized by the government. So, the organizations don't necessarily have to pick up the entire burden. So, I think India needs a combination of some of these progressive policies, but also ease the burden on the industry. If you look at the creche law, I think it's very progressive to have a creche. And so, if somebody is really worried about childcare, they can have the kid with them in your nearby creche. But if you look at the law, it's actually quite loose, in open-ended. Not loose is the wrong word, but open-ended to interpretation, and 100% cost and liabilities on the organizations. So I am being politically incorrect, but organizations worry about these things. I've been on the other side trying to cater to this for some big organization, and I know the challenges which come along with it. And I am fully supportive of the Posh Act. I think it's there for a right reason. We've all been privy to, issues which happen at workplace, and I don't think there's anything to change in the Posh Act. But there has to be. It went on the other extreme of fear with a lot of men folks in the organization. That, what language can I speak? How can I sit? So you're asking for a very fundamental habit change of a lot of leadership level people, and they are subtly going to be very uncomfortable. So how do you address that? Now, those are open-ended questions, but they do contribute to, less women being hired for various reasons.
Let me
And as I may drill on talent, but that then becomes secondary. Sorry, back to you.
Mhm. So let me share, a study we did for our batch, our own IM batch of women at our silver anniversary, to understand how women's stories were different from men's. Because obviously, as I'm sure you remember, when you're graduating, you all feel the same,
Yeah.
and you all more or less expect that your life trajectory will be similar, your career trajectory will be similar, and so on. So one of the things we found was that women's careers played out very, very differently from the men in our batch, our graduating batch. And of course, there were the reasons which you would expect, like obviously motherhood is is a big reason. The fact that, as you said, sometimes you don't have a financial pressure that makes it absolutely essential, and so you have some of those options. But there were many other factors which we found played into this. Like, for instance, frankly, often women didn't feel valued enough for their work. And therefore, you see, the choice of should I work or not is so influenced by what's my experience in the workplace. If my
Yeah.
experience is that, I'm very valued, my reluctance, I'll be that much more reluctant to leave the workforce. On the other hand, if my experience of being in the workforce is one where I'm, consistently feeling undervalued, or feeling that, okay, compared to my male colleagues, my promotions are a little bit slower, people talk to me differently, they don't pay as much attention to me when I speak in a meeting room, all these micro daily, hundreds of interactions which tell you, are you valued here or not? And when you're not feeling terribly valued, it's much easier to make a call that, you know is this really worth it? After all, why am I doing all of this? And for my kids, I'm the only mother they're ever going to have, whereas the organization, if I go, somebody else. So what I'm saying is that the experiences were different, and one of the things we found was that the women who stayed on had two, three things going for them. One, they had really good support systems in some form, or they created them. Even if they didn't have them necessarily to start with, they somehow found that kind of a support system. And that was really a very, very important factor. The other thing we discovered was that, they were the women who, for some reason, loved what they did. So, obviously, I love what I do. There are many others. We have the wonderful author Rashmi Bansal in our batch, who absolutely, obviously, is magnificent at what she does, loves what she does, and so on. There are many others as well. So the women who loved what they did, their choice, therefore, was much more likely to be, okay, it's really, really hard, but we're going to find some way to make it work, because that work part is contributing so much meaning to our lives, and we really care about it. On the other hand, often for men, that choice is simply not there. So, the society's expectation is you graduate, you start working, and then you work till you retire. So there's no real option, and for women, this choice of should I stay working is a choice they almost have to make, almost daily. That is this something I really want to do, or is this not, something I want to do? So, we just found that women's experiences, and therefore their need for meaning and being valued in the workplace, was so strong in deciding whether, it still matters enough to make their way through all of this.
Yeah.
So
So,
I want to ask
mhm.
you another question, Anu. You've written a book on color and race, and the role that plays, and obviously you've worked for a significant part of your career globally, and so you've experienced some of that. One of the things that I've been wondering about, and I want to see how you think about this, is that in India, the DNI movement largely came because global organizations, brought that into the conversation. It's not really homegrown in that sense. Um, we don't really discuss about diversity in other formats. And I'm wondering if you think things like, do we have enough minorities, religious minorities, caste minorities in different, or even regional, regional distribution, like north, south, east, west, northeast, do you think these are conversations which are worth having in India, or do you feel that people would be very hesitant and uncomfortable to have them?
Sure. I think, I'll come to the other forms of diversity, and I do agree with you, it's not homegrown at all. It started with it's a good thing to do because people, big companies across the world are talking about it. So we should embrace it in some way. Excuse me. But before I touch upon that, I think going back to the point that you made, I thought this was really insightful, having studied your own batchmates. But my limited point would be, had they not had a choice, what would they do? And if women from I'm Ahmedabad cannot push the needle, who else will? And by saying, that the women have to be out there, they can pursue their passion, whether Rashmi Bansal writes or you do your Uncube. To me, that's a value add, because finally, you are working with another well-known leader in the market, Jaspreet, who's well-known. So there is something which is working here. Rashmi's books are read by men and women both. So to me, that interplay about what you love and what you do is equally important. And value, I can tell you from my personal experiences, it wasn't easy. But value issues could arise for men too, because there's so much competition, there's so many of them out there. And every time I felt less valued, I became more demanding and more persistent. So that's probably the framework. And I think this is precisely my point about, if such well thought and well educated women step off because they're not being valued, then I think the question I would have is, how will they make sure this changes for the future generation? Because then the change doesn't happen. So I'll leave it there, but that would be my thought. But coming back to the next question around the whole diversity piece, I agree with you. I think India is somewhere right now just about scraping the surface on gender. We are way behind on talking about racism or even disability or LGBT. I think we are way behind. I won't even say way behind. I don't think it's a priority. Given it in this country, there's so many other challenges. It is just not surfacing at the fore. For me, the real a real thing which brought it to the surface was when I was working in the US or UK, where actually my color was more prominent than my gender. And I felt that there were times I had it tough because I was a brown woman. And so I had an intersectionality of color and gender.
Yeah.
And that impacted in the way I worked. And for me, maybe I always start saying I'm equal and not inferior, but the world didn't see me like that. They saw me as this brown Indian woman, and brown, whether we like it or not, is associated with a developing country or poverty or a certain thing which is yet coming of age. So if I was to sit around a table and give a view, it wasn't taken seriously, because not because I was a woman, but because I was brown. And so I felt that I have always felt in my life that color played more prominence. Maybe I worked in MNCs than my gender. I think, having worked in investment banking, I reach a gender agnostic position. And maybe I was fortunate enough in this place that I worked with leaders who are very diverse. And I'm talking hardcore traders and bankers. I'm not talking about, more generous functions. But we reached a position where they didn't see my color, they didn't see my gender. I just became one of them. And that's when I thought I was in my mojo. And I really enjoyed myself. And I thought I worked at my peak and my best. So coming back to India, I think, with due respect, even in Color Matters, when I did a lot of research, I spoke to over 500 people. I had 200 people sharing their vivid experiences. I picked up about 50, 60 stories that are in the book. Those are all real time. But what was surprising, and probably I knew it at certain level, but it wasn't as evident till I got out and did my own research, that India is actually quite racist, both in terms of color and you put a black guy in India and you see the reaction we and I count myself in it, we evoke in ourselves when we see a black person. And the well said colonial hangover is yet there in this country. When Agora speaks, it's very different. So there are those shades which make a variation. India woke up to the whole debate about color and racism after George Floyd happened in the US. And again, it happened at a peak, but it's kind of suddenly, somewhere much more milder now. But I think we do need to focus on that, because when we look at the caste system, and India is one of those countries where I know your surname and I know where you come from. There are already
There's so much information in it.
Yeah. So if you look at my name, it's Anuranjita Kumar. right? And once I asked my dad, why am I Kumar? Because we're Srivastavs. And my parents are engineers and doctors, right? And they said, no, 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 in UP and all, we write Kumar so that nobody should know your caste, just in
Same with
case.
Lal. Same with Lal, by the way. It doesn't mean anything. Same
Okay, so
reason.
Kumar means nothing. It could be South Indian, it could be Bihari, it could be from UP. But think about it, our surname is such a giveaway. So
Mm.
I'm married to a Punjabi, and let's take a surname like Singh, which could be a Rajput or could be a Punjabi. But the moment we say Singh, the image is Punjabi, non-veg, loud, vivacious, energetic. So we've got positives and we've got negatives associated just purely with the surname. And this plays out very vividly at workplace. Let's say we are a very diverse country and we should enjoy the diversity this country brings in terms of different sets of people. But it could also, what is our strength could also be our Achilles heels. And, we see that play out in workplace where there's a South Indian lobby and there's a North Indian lobby. And, we kind of keep dividing ourselves. And I think one thing I learned whilst I was overseas is that, yes, it was comforting, but till I learned their culture and I learned what they were, I'm never going to break that through. So some of my best friends are British or Americans, and we don't see nationality and we don't see color. But it took some conscious effort on both sides to make it happen. So I would say, yeah, India, long way and a lot of work to be done. But I'm sure leaders like you who are bringing this discussion to the fore are hopefully going to move the needle in time to come.
Actually, I'm so glad you spoke about this because I myself was really pleasantly surprised when, the very first board I was part of, when I was invited, it was for two sets of diversity. Obviously, gender, that's always going to be there. But also because this was an organization where most other board members were from the South, and to bring a regional diversity, and I was really happy that someone was thinking of it in that context. And to be honest, at that time I was thinking, how come none of the other organizations have I so consciously heard this conversation, that is our senior leadership team regionally representative enough? Do we have people from different parts of the country? Those kinds of conversations haven't happened as much as I'm hoping that they will in the future, because I also believe that there are different elements that different parts of India bring into any kind of discussion, and it would be a pity for us not to be conscious of that. Um, my final question, Anu, do you
Sorry,
think?
before I move to the final question, I just also want to share, as a part of Color Matters, I also did some research in, just Vedas and the history of
Mhm.
our civilization. And as we know, and we've grown up learning that, there's Brahmins who are the gurus and the Vaishyas who do the
Mhm.
trade, and then there are the warriors, and then there are Shudras, right? I think in the old times, it was divided in terms of division of labor, and it was done in a way that skilled people are doing certain things and there were unskilled jobs. But I think after millions of years those concepts exist and they've taken a shape of power plays,
Yeah.
right? So if you belong to a higher caste of a Brahmin, a certain privilege is associated with it. So to me, a lot of driver about racism and diversity is also power. And I've done a whole analysis on Maslow hierarchy and connecting it to that, because for somebody to feel the power and feel superior, somebody has to be inferior. So I think gone are the days where we're just talking about skill sets. It's now, given all that has happened in progressive India, there are people from so-called lower castes who are doctors or engineers, but the mindset around the surname and what they were supposed to do
Mhm.
versus what they do makes me feel belittled as a higher caste. And that's where the conflict comes in. So I just thought I'd share that as well. Sorry,
No,
Shalini.
it's a very important point. I certainly do believe that these are issues we haven't addressed. I think partly because, in the 90s with the whole Mandal Commission movement, reservation. So, reservation in the government obviously followed a completely different route. And I think the conversation almost ended there, and it became like, the conversation around diversity became one of reservation,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it never really entered the Indian senior leadership conversation of actual diversity, which is not connected with reservation, but do we want to bring somebody, not because we have to bring somebody.
And also that then has a boomerang impact. I mean,
Yeah.
today I see lots of states talking about 70%, 80% reservation. Reservation is not a privilege for the locals. It's a social movement to pick up a few who don't have access to means. But 60, 70% reservation and political drivers is hurting. So, yeah, I would completely agree with you.
So, I know my final question is around diversity of views, really, because as we move into a world that's getting increasingly complex, where we all in our organizational forms and in our entrepreneurial hats need to deal with change at a pace that we haven't seen before, and we know for a
Yeah.
fact that research shows that the greater the diversity of views, and sometimes, things like race, gender, region, caste, whatever are shorthands for diversity of views. But that that's not necessarily the case. You can have those metrics, without necessarily having openness in an organization for diversity of views, which is what one really, really wants. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts around what we and other, and say business leaders and, organizational leaders need to be doing to encourage that diversity of views? Do you think everybody understands how critical that's going to be, firstly?
I think the answer to your last point is probably not. And when I talk to a lot of CXOs or the boards, I would say there's a mixed emotion, right? Again, there are a couple of reasons why senior leaders, and I do believe that you need a strong senior leadership endorsement for an open culture like diversity of views. Some of them do it because it's just the politically right thing to do. So it's the thing that you talk about because that's how you want to be seen as leadership. Then there is a bunch who does it because it's the right thing to do for the organization or the brand. So there is a branding aspect to it. And the third is because you genuinely believe that diverse views gets you more creativity. And I think that's the big hook for the seniors. So, especially during COVID and post COVID, we all know that the challenges we would be faced with are not going to be solved with the solutions of yesterday for problems of today. So we need different solutions, and we need to tap into different products and different consumer sets. And what worked, a product which was probably booming till yesterday, and there's several of them in hospitality or transport or whatever, it's just gone. The world has been redefined forever. You look at real estate. So what are you going to do? And I think that's the bit of thinking which is not so easy to come about. Most, I find that quite a few people make the mistake of saying, oh, we have the right thinking. We just need to, it's like a bulb will go on and Shalini will come in and tell us what the solution to our problems is going to be. But Shalini, the best you can do is ignite them to think differently. And I'm sure that even the existing teams can evolve their thinking and think differently, but it's nothing like having a different set of minds working together. And I think, one of the reasons I find that I've been with organization for 2 decades and I've been with one organization for 3, 4 years. But lately, when I'm running with a fund or I'm running with WIT, nothing has challenged my thinking more than what I do now.
Yeah.
And with big organization, we all tend to get into a comfort zone because they're very laid down procedures, policies. We all work in a matrix. There is a bureaucracy, which is great in a BAU environment. But when you have to do some radical changes, you have to change that very radically. And bigger organizations struggle with that because they become a victim of their own systems and processes. And it's not easy. I
Yeah.
think the financial crisis was a great trigger. And I was in London when that happened. It changes forever in the way we think and we do business and all of that. Similarly, I think COVID is a great opportunity, which is challenging us as a race in some way to think differently and saying, it's not going to work anymore. And which is where if you can get people with different mindsets, and I'm saying any kind of diversity will help. And I can tell you, that as a part of our VC fund, we're working with youngsters. And a lot of time, there was this view that startups are only for 20 plus or 30 plus. And I can tell you for myself, when I got into this gig,
Mhm.
there was a very well-known investment banking firm, and I was talking to them about a fundraise, and they said, you know what, Anu, the challenge is you're in your 40s and you're a woman, right? So I don't know who'll take a bet on the
I've
ventures that
heard
you.
that too. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard that.
And it was surprising, and I was like, how can you even say that? I've got the energy, I've got the thinking, I've got the passion, got I'm sorry, but why did age make a difference? But the whole perception that startup gig is only for a youngster, I think we've had to challenge that. And today we are in a more comfortable place because we pushed it. But that's what I was faced with, saying you've only worked for bigger organization. Can you really pull this together? And this is after I thought, I was bringing in enough and more credibility. So like that, I think for big companies, small companies, or medium-sized companies, you do need a very different kind of set of people around you right now. And it is the need of the hour. Because to me, what's going to keep your business afloat is innovation and creativity. And guess how you're going to get it? By
Mhm.
diverse viewpoints. So that to me is the business case of why this is a must do and not nice to do in current times.
No, but that's so well said, Anu. And that's, to be honest, has been one of my worries because um, the understanding perhaps of just how critical it's going to be to have diverse viewpoints represented in many different ways is maybe just still nascent. Organizational barriers to really addressing some of these core issues are still fairly strong. And as you said, women have taken such a bad hit during the last few months, and already women, our workforce participation is pretty much at the bottom of the heap. So I think we're not in a very good place at all, to be honest. Be it gender, be it any other form of diversity, ability, sexual orientation, caste, religion, region. I mean, whichever metric or dimension of diversity we look at, um, we don't seem to be in a as I mean, we're not in a good position. Why am I trying to even make it sound good? We are not in a good position, and it does cause me a lot of concern. Also, because as you said, the fact is that in our, the future of work, the future of a very, very different world is going to need agility. And that, that's what you were speaking about. It's going to need agility. It's going to need creativity, innovation. It's going to need the capacity to think different. And if people at the top come from such similar backgrounds, that restricts the ability to think different. And that's going to be one more of the many, many barriers which Indian organizations are going to have to work with in being like a startup, agile, innovative, when some of that vigor which comes from different ideas, intermingling and creating something new is going to be missing. So that's my personal concern. I feel we're heading, all our metrics seem to be heading in the wrong direction, almost to disbelief, almost disbelief. I I cannot actually believe the data when I look at it. I cannot believe that one third, that our labor force participation has dropped by one third. I cannot believe it in 15 years. But that's the data. So obviously, we can't wish it away. It's the reality. So so there's a lot which is, to be honest, on my mind. But let me take some questions and see what um, so there are lots of comments.
Yeah, I can see that now.
Let's see. Okay, Abha says, I'm going to broach a tickly question. How about women suddenly becoming unemployable? Is age a filter which negates experience and accomplishments?
I don't think they become unemployable. I think what's happening during COVID is there's a huge stress on cost. And every company, unfortunately, is focused on keeping afloat by cutting costs. There are very few companies who are right now investing. So I can assure you there are no companies who are saying, I want to fire women. Don't get me wrong. They are just saying that we don't have a choice but to cut down non-core or non-revenue generating roles, right? So what happens is a lot of women are employed into support roles, and by the definition of being employed in the support roles, those roles are becoming redundant. So I would say women are not becoming unemployable, the roles are becoming redundant. And it's not, it's, I don't think it's even related to age. It's also, I would say that it's also quickly reskilling yourself and moving around. If I was actually back in banking, I would say, okay, tell me how I can generate revenues for you, because I also have to reskill and recast myself. But the numbers that you are seeing is largely being driven by cost drives in the industry. And then what happens is when redundancy kicks in, money kicks in, and then the women are saying, look, okay, my husband's employed, so let me take a break. There's some money, it'll keep me afloat, and I'll come back, when things get better. But that's the trend we're seeing in the industry. Now the challenge is coming back, because that itself is another
Very
challenge
hard.
to deal with.
Very,
Yeah.
very hard. So then I'll read a comment from Richa. First is it's a question: are we really saying we are at the level of ranking worldwide, including women's participation in labor force, the unorganized sector? And the answer is absolutely, Richa. This includes unorganized sector as well. It includes construction, agriculture, which are very large employers. Second question is: are we seeing more women plunging into an entrepreneurial journey post a certain stage of their career when they see a wall? Now, I'll just say for myself, and then I'll pass it to you. I know that I think this is the case amongst many women that I know, that, after reaching a wall in larger organizations, they do decide that they'll start something on their own because they can see perhaps their capabilities, maybe not being valued as much, or they feel they are capable of much, much more than they're getting room for doing in an organization. I know, what's your experience?
I would agree, but I would also add. I think there are two reasons. One is, as Shalini has very articulately talked about, the value, and when the odds tip in, saying I can create more value outside the organization than inside the organization, they move on. But in my head, they continue to create value for the industry, whether inside or outside. I also feel a lot of women like myself have stepped off because we want to create a bigger impact. I frankly felt that beyond a point, bigger organization, there's only so far you can go in terms of creativity. I felt that the creativity quotient, and this will apply to men as well, does get stifled. I mean, there are lots of limitations about what you can engage and what you can't. There's compliance, there's governance. So for me, plunging into a fund, and by that logic, a VC or a private equity space is largely male dominated, wasn't an easy decision. But I love it because, it's gotten me into really mainline business. I'm kind of learning every day, and also doing my own venture. Would I be able to do with any of the corporates that I was working with? Absolutely not. Even if I said I had the capacity and the bandwidth to do it over and above my day job, I wouldn't be permitted because of compliance or governance issues. And so for me, it's a bit like taking a bet on myself and going out and creating it. I think entrepreneurial journeys are actually even tougher than a corporate journey, where you
Much
have
tougher.
a safeguard of a regular paycheck. And I certainly, I'm not doing this just purely charitably. I do want to create value. I have a team which I have to look after. I want to make sure they get paid. So it's tougher. Now suddenly you're accountable for 20 people's lives. But as I said, that accountability has pushed and probably got the best out of me. So I love it because it gives me the whole value creation aspect, which Shalini said, and it's a different life. And in some way, I think I have just recasted myself into another cycle. So I've loved the reinvention bit of it.
That's so true. I know, when I was making this leap, I told someone that I feel that, my capabilities are bigger than my role, or it'll ever be, bigger than any role will ever be. And I remember that person, because, this felt like such a weird thing to say, and it felt like, you're being very, I don't know, bragging, which I wasn't, because I had no idea whether that was in fact true. But, them often in very large organizations established a certain way, your role defines you and puts you in, there is, I won't say necessarily a box in a bad way, but obviously there are certain things that you're accountable for and many, many other things that you're not accountable for. And therefore, if you want to see your talents completely express themselves, for some people, it does mean moving out of an organizational role and experiencing an entrepreneurial journey, which I think in a sense, pushes you and extends you on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Because every day you're figuring something new which you
And it
didn't know
requires
how
a
to
lot
do
of courage. I mean, it requires a lot of courage to leave a comfort zone and
Yeah.
plunge into an amorphous, ambiguous zone to do something else. I mean, I'm sure Shalini and I could go and find another corporate job. We could. So we made a choice saying, look, we want to do something bigger than a corporate job,
Yeah.
which will have more lasting impact. And that's the journey probably we are on.
One last question. Abha asks, is this a culture which is completely top driven? I guess she means diversity as a culture.
I think the top sponsorship is very important, but every time we've challenged this problem in an organization, the top sponsorship is extremely important to push this. You know, there'll be varying sets of people who believe in it, and then you have to do bottoms up too. So
Mhm.
I think I would take a two-pronged approach because you may just do bottoms up, but if you don't have top sponsorship, you may not get the
Yeah.
resources, the money, whatever
It's
investment.
limited. Yeah.
And if you just keep pushing it from the top without a buy-in at junior levels, you will not succeed either. So it's a bit of both.
Very well said. Bottoms up and top down, both working in tandem. So I think that's it from the questions that I have of you, Anu. I'm so glad you joined us. Thank you so much. It was such an interesting conversation. For those of us watching, even though Anu and I are friends, we haven't really spoken about many of these issues before. So it was really interesting to hear, Anu's views on diversity, gender, and diversity in other dimensions, and where we are as a country today. What are some of our strengths? And I would say we have many underused strengths of diversity, but maybe the consciousness and conversations aren't where they need to be to become much more innovative and agile, which organizations need to be. Thank you so much, Anand.
Thank you. Pleasure being here. And as I said, my mission accomplished because there's so many takeaways that I'm walking away with as well.
Thank you. So, thank you everyone for joining us. Do join us next Saturday as well. I have with me Shreyasi Singh, author, co founder of Harappa Education, and we're going to talk about the future of online education in India. As all of you perhaps have read, online education in India is booming, and we're going to discuss what that means for all of us next week. So, do tune in. Um, Replays of this conversation will, of course, be available on my LinkedIn profile, but they'll also be available on Uncube's website on Monday. So do feel free to like, comment, share it with as many people as you think should hear some of these conversations. And with that, thank you very much. Have a great weekend.